In this episode, we focus on a skill that sits quietly underneath almost every good architecture decision, knowing what matters most to the organization and what must be protected first. Beginners sometimes imagine that security architecture starts with controls, like encryption or monitoring, but mature architecture starts with priorities, meaning the assets and business objectives that define what success and harm look like. Governance, risk, and compliance work is often abbreviated as governance, risk, and compliance, GRC. And the reason it matters for architecture is that it tells you how decisions get made, how risk is judged, and how compliance is proven. If you do not know which assets are critical and which business objectives are driving the organization, you can build a technically impressive design that protects the wrong things or protects everything equally and becomes too expensive and too slow. The goal is not to turn security into a business lecture, but to connect security decisions to real outcomes the organization cares about, like safety, continuity, trust, and legal obligations. When you can identify key assets and objectives, you can prioritize controls, justify trade-offs, and explain your design in a way that aligns with governance expectations. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A key asset is anything that has value and needs protection, but the word asset can be broader than most beginners expect. Assets include data, systems, services, identities, cryptographic keys, intellectual property, and even processes that keep the organization running. Some assets are obvious, like customer records, payment systems, or medical data, while others are less visible, like build pipelines, administrative credentials, or monitoring infrastructure. Assets also have different kinds of value, such as financial value, legal value, operational value, and reputational value. For architecture, an asset is key when its compromise would cause serious harm or prevent the organization from achieving its goals. This means you cannot identify key assets by guessing what sounds important. You identify them by thinking about impact. If losing control of an asset would cause a major outage, a regulatory problem, or a breach of trust that cannot be repaired quickly, it deserves high priority. Business objectives are the outcomes the organization is trying to achieve, and they provide the context for why assets matter. Objectives might include delivering a service reliably, protecting customer trust, meeting legal obligations, expanding into new markets, or maintaining mission continuity during emergencies. These objectives are not just leadership slogans. They translate into measurable expectations like uptime targets, response times, acceptable outage windows, or the ability to prove compliance during audits. Objectives also shape risk tolerance, because an organization that must provide critical services may accept certain costs and constraints to avoid downtime, while another organization may prioritize speed of feature delivery and accept different kinds of operational risk. For a beginner, it helps to remember that security exists to support objectives, not replace them. The best security architecture decisions make it easier to achieve objectives safely, rather than creating a parallel set of goals that compete with the business. When objectives are clear, security priorities become easier to defend. The connection between assets and objectives becomes practical when you think in terms of what must be protected to keep objectives achievable. If an objective is to keep a service available, key assets might include the service itself, the infrastructure it runs on, and the systems that support recovery. If an objective is to protect privacy, key assets might include personal data, identity systems, and the controls that prevent unauthorized access. If an objective is to comply with regulation, key assets might include evidence records, logs, and processes that demonstrate accountability. This mapping is important because it helps you prioritize controls based on what they protect. It also helps you avoid overspending on low-impact areas while underprotecting high-impact ones. In exam scenarios, you will often be given a short story about an organization, and your job is to infer what objectives and assets are most important based on the clues in that story. Then you choose the architectural approach that protects those priorities first. A practical method for identifying key assets is to ask a few simple questions that expose impact and dependency without needing advanced jargon. What information, if exposed, would cause serious harm to people or to the organization's trust? What systems, if unavailable, would stop core operations or violate obligations? What capabilities, if manipulated, would allow attackers to take over the environment, such as privileged identity systems or key management? What evidence would you need if something went wrong, and where is that evidence stored? These questions help you find assets that are easy to overlook, like the ability to authenticate users, the ability to deploy changes safely, or the ability to detect incidents. Architecture decisions often fail when teams focus only on the visible application and ignore the support systems that make the application trustworthy. When you broaden the asset view, you build more realistic and resilient security designs. The exam often rewards this broader thinking because it reflects real architecture work. Once you identify assets, you need to understand that assets have different security needs, often described as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Not every asset needs the same balance of these qualities. Some assets, like personal records, may prioritize confidentiality, while others, like a public safety service, may prioritize availability. Many critical assets require strong integrity because incorrect data can cause harm even if it is not leaked. Architecture priorities come from aligning these needs with objectives, because the organization may accept a small delay to protect integrity but may not accept downtime that affects mission delivery. This is where GRC thinking becomes useful, because governance sets how decisions are made, risk management evaluates trade-offs, and compliance ensures obligations are met. If you treat all assets as needing maximum protection in all dimensions, you will build something too heavy. If you ignore the different needs, you may protect the wrong property and still fail the objective. Another concept that matters is asset ownership and accountability, because an asset is not truly protected if no one is responsible for it. In real organizations, assets often span teams, and responsibility can be unclear, which leads to gaps. Architecture work often includes clarifying who owns a system, who approves changes, who reviews access, and who responds when issues occur. This is not about organizational politics. It is about ensuring controls can actually be operated and enforced. For example, if a key asset is customer data, someone must own the data classification rules, access approval process, and retention policy. If a key asset is a critical service, someone must own uptime targets, incident response procedures, and recovery plans. When ownership is clear, you can design controls that match operational reality, such as who can grant emergency access and who must review logs. Exam questions may test whether you recognize that accountability is part of protecting assets, not separate from it. Business objectives can conflict, and that conflict is where architecture priorities are tested. An organization may want rapid delivery and strong compliance, or high availability and strict access controls, or rich analytics and privacy protection. A beginner might think there must be a perfect solution that satisfies everything fully, but architecture is often about choosing the best balance under constraints and documenting the rationale. GRC helps here because it provides a structured way to decide what trade-offs are acceptable. For example, you may accept some friction in user workflows to reduce risk to sensitive assets, or you may accept a limited set of features to meet a regulatory deadline. The architect's job is to make these trade-offs visible and defensible, not hidden and accidental. This is why identifying objectives is so important, because without them you cannot judge which compromises are reasonable. The exam often uses best answer language to test whether you can pick the option that best matches the organization's stated priorities. Prioritization also benefits from the idea of criticality tiers, meaning not everything is equally critical and controls should match the tier. A top-tier asset might require stronger access control, stronger monitoring, more rigorous change control, and stronger recovery planning. A lower-tier asset might still require basic hygiene, but it may not justify the same cost and operational burden. This tiered approach keeps security proportional and supports delivery because teams can move faster on low-risk systems while applying more discipline where the impact is high. Tiering also supports clearer communication because you can say this system is high impact, Therefore, it must meet these requirements, rather than debating each requirement endlessly. It also improves audit readiness because you can show that your controls are risk-based, which many governance approaches expect. For beginners, tiering is a way to avoid extremes, where you either underprotect everything or overprotect everything. In an exam setting, the best architectural move often includes risk-based prioritization that aligns with key assets and objectives. A subtle but important asset category is the set of control-enabling assets, meaning the systems that make security possible. Identity systems, key management, logging infrastructure, configuration management, and monitoring capabilities are assets that support the protection of other assets. If these are compromised or unavailable, many other controls become weaker or fail entirely. For example, if identity is weak, every access control decision is less trustworthy. If logging is missing, you lose evidence and detection capability, which affects both security and compliance. Architects therefore prioritize protecting control-enabling assets, even if they are not directly part of the business product, because they are foundational. Beginners sometimes overlook these because they do not feel like business assets, but they are essential to achieving business objectives safely. Exam scenarios may include hints about weak monitoring or unclear identity, and a strong answer recognizes those as critical gaps because they undermine protection across the environment. When you are practicing this skill, you should listen for signals in any scenario that reveal objectives and key assets. Words like mission-critical, regulatory, sensitive, customer trust, financial transactions, or public safety usually point to high-impact obligations. References to third parties, shared environments, or rapid change often signal areas where governance and evidence matter. If a scenario mentions audits or compliance reviews, evidence and traceability become key assets. If it mentions outages or disruption, availability and recovery capabilities become key assets. Your job is to translate those signals into priorities that guide the architectural recommendation. This is not about memorizing a list of assets. It is about learning how to infer what the organization values and what risks are most damaging. When you can do that, you answer questions faster and with more confidence because you are anchored in purpose rather than drifting through technical details. To conclude, identifying key assets and business objectives is the foundation of prioritizing GRC architecture work because it tells you what must be protected, what must be proven, and what trade-offs are acceptable. You define assets broadly, including data, systems, identities, and the control-enabling capabilities that make security possible. You clarify objectives so you can understand what success looks like and what failures are unacceptable, and then map assets to objectives to set priorities. You account for confidentiality, integrity, and availability needs differently across assets, and you ensure ownership and accountability so protections can actually operate. You use proportionality and tiering to avoid over-engineering and to keep delivery moving while still protecting what matters most. When you build this mindset, your security architecture becomes aligned, defensible, and effective, and you are better prepared for exam scenarios that test judgment rather than simple recall.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.